My name is Serafina. I'm 29, and 3 months ago I discovered that everything I believed about family loyalty was a lie. What started as a simple wedding planning discussion at Sunday dinner turned into the moment that would shatter my world and expose a conspiracy that had been brewing for years. As I sat across from my parents and sister in our childhood dining room watching them casually discuss why my wedding didn't matter as much as hers, I had no idea I was about to uncover a betrayal so deep it would destroy our family forever and lead to the most satisfying revenge of my lifetime. But before we dive into how I got my sweet justice, let me know in the comments, where are you watching from? Hit that like button if you've ever felt like the forgotten child, and don't forget to subscribe, because this family drama is about to get absolutely wild. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens when entitled parents meet a daughter who refuses to be walked over anymore. Growing up as the older sister to Madison was like living in a shadow that somehow grew larger every year. While I was building my tech startup from scratch, working 18-hour days and turning down social events to focus on my dreams, Madison was the golden child who could do no wrong. She was 3 years younger, effortlessly beautiful, with that classic all-American cheerleader look, and had a talent for making everything seem easy. Don't get me wrong, I love my sister, or at least I thought I did. But watching your parents light up whenever she walked into a room while treating your achievements like background noise does something to you over time. When I sold my first app for $2 million at 25, my parents' reaction was a polite, "That's nice, honey," before immediately shifting the conversation to Madison's new marketing job at a local boutique. When Madison got promoted to assistant manager 6 months later, they threw her a celebration dinner and invited the extended family. The pattern was so consistent it became my normal. I graduated summa cum laude from Stanford, while Madison barely scraped through community college, but somehow her graduation party was twice the size of mine. I bought my first house at 26 while Madison was still living at home, but my parents spent more time helping her redecorate her childhood bedroom than they did visiting my new place. When I started dating Marcus 2 years ago, I thought things might change. He was everything parents supposedly want in a son-in-law, successful surgeon, came from a good family, treated me like a queen. But even when we got engaged 8 months ago, the excitement from my parents felt forced, obligatory. Meanwhile, Madison had been dating Derek for barely 6 months when they announced their engagement, and suddenly my parents couldn't stop talking about what a perfect match they were. The real kicker came when we started planning our weddings. Both Madison and I wanted October dates, which should have been fine since there are plenty of weekends in the month. But somehow, when the family discussions started happening, it became clear that there was only room for one October wedding in the family calendar, and it wasn't going to be mine. "Sarah, honey, you have to understand," my mother said during one particularly painful family meeting. "Derek's family has already booked the country club for October 15th. It's been in his family for generations. His parents got married there, his grandparents. It's tradition." I pointed out that I had mentioned my October preference first back in January, when Marcus and I got engaged. Madison didn't even get engaged until March. But according to my parents, Madison's wedding was more complicated because Derek's family was prominent in the community and there were social expectations to consider. "Your wedding can be just as beautiful in November," my father added, not meeting my eyes. "December even. Winter weddings are very elegant these days." What they didn't say, but what hung in the air like a toxic cloud, was that my wedding didn't matter as much. Madison's wedding was the important one, the one that would be talked about, the one that deserved the prime date and the family's full attention. Mine was the inconvenience that needed to be worked around. The conversations became increasingly frustrating as weeks passed. My mother would call with updates about Madison's dress shopping trips, flower arrangements, and menu tastings, but whenever I tried to discuss my own wedding plans, the enthusiasm would drain from her voice. She'd give perfunctory responses and quickly change the subject back to Madison's preparations. I watched my sister get swept up in the excitement of being the center of attention, and I couldn't entirely blame her. This was what she'd always known: being the priority, being celebrated, being the one whose needs came first. But I was tired of being the afterthought, the daughter whose dreams were always secondary to whatever Madison wanted. The final straw came during what should have been a fun family outing to tour potential venues for my reception. We were supposed to look at 3 different locations, but somehow the day became all about how these venues compared to Madison's country club choice. Every space we visited prompted comments about how it wasn't quite as elegant as where Madison would be having her reception, how the catering couldn't possibly match the country club's standards, how the location wasn't as convenient for out-of-town guests. By the end of that day, I felt completely defeated. It was clear that no venue I chose would ever measure up to Madison's in my parents' eyes, not because of any objective criteria, but because it wasn't Madison's choice. I was being set up to have the lesser wedding no matter what I did. That night, I sat in my apartment with Marcus venting about the day's frustrations. He listened patiently, but I could see the anger building in his eyes as I described my parents' behavior. "Sarah," he said, "finally you realize they're never going to prioritize your wedding right. It doesn't matter what venue you choose or how much you spend or how perfect everything is. In their minds, Madison is getting married and you're just also getting married." His words hit me like a slap of cold reality. He was right. I had been trying to win a competition that was rigged from the start. My parents had already decided whose wedding mattered more, and no amount of effort on my part was going to change that fundamental bias. That's when I made my first decision that would change everything. If my family couldn't prioritize my wedding, then maybe it was time to show them exactly what they were choosing to miss. The idea came to me during one of my late-night stress planning sessions when I was trying to figure out how to make a December wedding not feel like a consolation prize. I was scrolling through venue options online, getting increasingly frustrated with every "sorry, we're booked" response when I stumbled across something that made me stop breathing. A luxury wedding planning service in Tuscany was advertising their services, and one image in particular caught my eye: a vineyard estate with rolling hills, cypress trees, and a villa that looked like something out of a fairy tale. Without really thinking about it, I clicked through to their portfolio, and that's when I saw it. Villa Bellacorte, a restored 16th-century estate, with its own vineyard chapel and accommodations for up to 50 guests. The price tag was breathtaking, nearly $200,000 for a week-long wedding experience including venue, catering, accommodation, and coordination services. But as I stared at those photos, something clicked. I had the money. Between my business, sales investments, and Marcus's surgeon salary, we could afford it without even denting our future plans. More importantly, I realized this wasn't just about having a beautiful wedding, this was about making a statement. When I presented the idea to Marcus the next morning, I was prepared for him to think I'd lost my mind. Instead, he was quiet for a long moment, then smiled in a way that told me he understood exactly what this meant. "You want to show them what they're missing," he said, not as a question but as a statement of fact. "I want to have the wedding we deserve," I corrected, but we both knew he was right. The planning process became my secret obsession. I worked with the Italian wedding coordinator Francesca, who treated our celebration like it was the event of the century. Every detail was perfect, from the locally sourced flowers to the wine pairings featuring vintages from the villa's own cellars. We arranged for a string quartet to play during the ceremony, a jazz band for cocktail hour, and a DJ who would keep the party going until dawn. The venue itself was a masterpiece. The villa had been owned by the same Tuscan family for over 400 years before being converted into an exclusive event space. The main building featured frescoed ceilings, marble floors, and floor-to-ceiling windows that opened onto terraced gardens. The chapel was original to the property with stone walls and stained glass windows that cast rainbow patterns across the altar. The guest accommodations were individual suites, each uniquely decorated with antique furniture and modern amenities. Francesca helped me design a weekend that would be more than just a wedding. It would be an experience that our guests would never forget. Friday would be a welcome dinner featuring local specialties and wines from the villa's vineyard. Saturday would be the ceremony and reception, with the celebration continuing late into the night. Sunday would be a farewell brunch on the villa's terrace, giving everyone time to recover and reflect on the magical weekend. The guest list was carefully curated: 35 of our closest friends and family members, people who had consistently shown up for us and celebrated our successes. I included my college roommates who had supported me through building my business, Marcus's medical school friends who had become like brothers to him, and our mutual friends who genuinely celebrated our relationship. Notably absent from the initial invitations were my parents and Madison, though I did include my grandmother's sister, Aunt Linda, my cousin James, and a few other extended family members who had always been supportive of my achievements. These were people who remembered my graduation, who asked about my business, who treated my successes as worthy of celebration. The invitations themselves were works of art, custom designed with watercolor illustrations of the Tuscan countryside and printed on handmade paper. Each one included detailed information about flights, accommodations, and the weekend's events, along with a personal note explaining how much each guest meant to us. When I finally told my parents about the Italy plans 6 weeks before Madison's wedding, their reaction was everything I had expected and worse. "Italy," my mother repeated, as if I had announced we were getting married on Mars. "Serafina, that's ridiculous. None of the family can afford to travel to Italy for a wedding." "The family that matters to me will find a way," I replied calmly. Just like Derek's family found a way to book the country club for generations. My father's face turned red in that way it does when he's trying not to lose his temper. "This is about money, isn't it? You're trying to prove some kind of point because we couldn't change Madison's date." "No, Dad, this is about me realizing that if I'm not a priority for my family's time and attention in America, maybe I should celebrate somewhere I will be treated like one." The silence that followed was deafening. Madison, who had been unusually quiet during this conversation, finally spoke up. "Sarah, you're being dramatic. We all want to be at your wedding. Can't you just change your plans so we can all be there together?" That's when I laughed, actually laughed for the first time in months. Change my plans? Like I've been changing my plans my entire life to accommodate what this family wants. "No, Madison. For once, other people can figure out how to accommodate me." I sent them the formal invitations 2 weeks later, along with information about flights and accommodations. The wedding was scheduled for October 22nd, exactly 1 week after Madison's country club affair. The timing was deliberate, close enough that they couldn't claim scheduling conflicts, but separate enough that there would be no confusion about which event took priority for whom. What I didn't know was that this decision would set in motion a chain of events that would reveal just how deep my family's betrayal actually went. The week of Madison's wedding was when everything started to unravel, though I didn't realize it at the time. I had flown back to the States 3 days before her ceremony, partly because Marcus insisted we should be there for family harmony, and partly because some masochistic part of me needed to see exactly what I was competing with. Madison's wedding was everything my parents had promised it would be: elegant, traditional, perfectly executed. The country club was decorated in blush and gold, the flowers were abundant, and every detail screamed expensive taste. Derek's family had indeed spared no expense, and my parents glowed with pride as they played host to what felt like half the town's social elite. The guest list was impressive, over 200 people, including local business leaders, politicians, and what seemed like everyone who was anyone in our hometown social hierarchy. My parents moved through the crowd like they were hosting a royal wedding, introducing Madison and Derek to important guests, and basking in the reflected glory of the event. But here's where things got interesting, and honestly, this is where the story takes a turn that even I couldn't have predicted. If you're watching this and you've ever suspected that your family has secrets they're keeping from you, hit that like button because what I'm about to tell you will make your jaw drop. And make sure you're subscribed with notifications on because the revenge that comes after this revelation is absolutely chef's kiss perfect. During the reception, I was standing near the bar when I overheard a conversation between my Aunt Linda and Derek's mother, Mrs. Richardson. They didn't see me, and what I heard made my blood run cold. So generous of Richard and Susan to contribute so much to make this perfect, Mrs. Richardson was saying. $50,000 is no small amount, especially when they mentioned having to take out a loan. My Aunt Linda nodded sympathetically. Well, they wanted Madison to have the fairy tale wedding, though I do feel bad that they couldn't do the same for Serafina. But of course, that was before they knew about the inheritance situation. Right, the grandmother's will. Such an unfortunate timing issue. At least Madison will be able to help them once everything is settled. I stood there, frozen as pieces of a puzzle I didn't even know existed started clicking into place. My parents had taken out a loan to pay for Madison's wedding. And what inheritance situation? My grandmother, my father's mother, had passed away 8 months ago, right around the time Madison got engaged, but I thought her modest estate had already been settled. The conversation continued, and I caught fragments that made even less sense. Something about timing, about waiting until after both weddings, about my parents managing funds that were supposed to be distributed later. None of it made sense with what I had been told about my grandmother's estate. I spent the rest of the reception in a daze, smiling and making small talk, while my mind raced through implications I didn't yet understand. Every time I looked at my parents, they seemed different somehow, like I was seeing them through a new lens that revealed details I'd never noticed before. That night, after the reception ended and I was back at my hotel, I couldn't shake what I'd overheard. So, I did something I probably should have done months ago. I called my cousin James, who had always been the family's unofficial keeper of information. "James, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." "Shoot, Sarah. You sound serious." What inheritance situation was Aunt Linda talking about tonight? Something about Grandma's will and timing. The silence on the other end of the phone lasted so long I thought the call had dropped. "James, Sarah. You don't know, do you?" "Know what?" Another pause. "Then, your grandmother left you her house and a significant portion of her savings. The will reading was supposed to happen after both you and Madison got married. Your parents have been managing the estate in the meantime." The room started spinning. "How much money are we talking about, James?" "About 1.2 million plus the house, which is worth another 800K. Your parents said they were waiting to tell you until after the wedding stress was over for both you and Madison." I managed to thank James and hang up before I completely lost it. Suddenly, everything made sense. My parents hadn't just been favoring Madison, they'd been spending my inheritance to pay for her perfect wedding while pushing my celebration aside. They'd literally used money that belonged to me to fund the event they deemed more important than mine. But that was just the beginning. Over the next 2 days, I started making phone calls and doing some digging that I should have done years ago. What I discovered was a pattern of financial manipulation that went far beyond one wedding. I called my grandmother's lawyer claiming I needed clarification about the estate timeline. What I learned was that the will had been very specific. I was to receive the bulk of the inheritance because I had been my grandmother's primary caregiver during her final years, visiting her weekly, handling her medical appointments, and ensuring she wasn't lonely. Madison, while loved, had rarely visited and had shown little interest in maintaining a relationship with our grandmother. My parents had been managing my grandmother's estate for 8 months, during which time they'd used the funds for Madison's engagement ring. Derek actually couldn't afford the 3-carat diamond he'd proposed. With a down payment on the house Madison and Derek were buying and various other expenses that they'd justified as family investments. The lawyer also revealed that my parents had specifically requested that I not be informed about the inheritance until after both weddings were completed, claiming they wanted to protect me from the stress of managing a large sum of money during wedding planning. But the real reason became clear when I saw the estate account statements. They'd been systematically draining the funds for Madison's benefit while keeping me in the dark. Meanwhile, I'd been completely self-sufficient since college, never asking for help, never knowing that there was family money that should have been mine years ago. I'd built my business, saved for my wedding, and planned my entire financial future without any knowledge of the inheritance that would have made everything easier. The final nail in the coffin came when I realized the timing of everything. My parents hadn't just accidentally double-booked October, they'd actively encouraged Madison to choose a date that would conflict with mine, knowing that if they made it inconvenient for me to have an October wedding, I might postpone or downsize my plans. Less money spent on my wedding meant more money available for Madison's needs. As I sat in my hotel room looking at the plane tickets to Italy that represented the most expensive statement I'd ever made, I realized I hadn't been making a statement at all. I'd been buying my own wedding with my own money while my family used my inheritance to fund my replacement. That's when I started planning my real revenge. The week in Tuscany was supposed to be about celebrating love and starting my new life with Marcus. Instead, it became the stage for the most satisfying psychological warfare I've ever conducted, and honestly, I surprised myself with how creative I could be when properly motivated. Villa Bellicorte was even more stunning in person than in the photos. The October Tuscan sun cast everything in golden light, the vineyard stretched endlessly in every direction, and the villa itself was a masterpiece of restoration that somehow felt both ancient and luxuriously modern. Francesca, our coordinator, had outdone herself. Every detail was perfect, from the ceremony setup in the villa's private chapel to the reception space on the terraced gardens overlooking the valley. The property was truly magnificent. Ancient cypress trees lined the long driveway leading to the main villa, their dark silhouettes creating dramatic shadows against the honey-colored stone buildings. The vineyard rows stretched across rolling hills heavy with grapes, ready for harvest. In the distance, medieval towns perched on hilltops like something from a Renaissance painting. But the real magic wasn't in the venue, it was in the guest list and what happened when my family finally arrived. Of the invitations I'd sent to my parents and Madison, only my parents had RSVP'd yes, and even then I could tell from my mother's phone call that they were coming reluctantly, as if attending my wedding was a chore they needed to get through. Madison had declined, claiming she and Derek couldn't afford the trip so soon after their own wedding expenses. The irony wasn't lost on me. My parents arrived 2 days before the ceremony, and I could see the exact moment they realized what they'd walked into. This wasn't just a wedding, this was a production that rivaled anything they'd ever experienced. The villa staff treated every guest like royalty. The accommodations were 5-star luxury, and every meal was a culinary experience featuring local ingredients and wines that cost more per bottle than most people spend on groceries in a week. Their suite was in the villa's original tower, with stone walls, antique furnishings, and a private terrace overlooking the vineyard. Fresh flowers were delivered daily, Local pastries appeared with their morning coffee, and a personal concierge was available to arrange any activities they desired. It was luxury on a scale they'd never experienced, and I could see them calculating the cost with every perfect detail they encountered. Serafina, my mother said, on the first evening as we sat on the villa's terrace watching the sunset over the Tuscan hills, this is all very elaborate. It's exactly what I wanted, I replied, sipping a glass of Brunello that had been aging in the villa's cellars since before I was born. I wanted our closest friends and family to experience something unforgettable, something worthy of celebrating the most important day of our lives. I watched my father calculate numbers in his head, probably trying to figure out how much this was all costing. What he didn't know yet was that I'd planned for this moment. The other guests had arrived throughout the day, and the contrast between their enthusiasm and my parents' discomfort was stark. Marcus's medical school friends were taking photos of everything, my college roommates were already planning their own destination weddings, and our mutual friends kept expressing amazement at the incredible experience we'd created for them. That night I hosted a welcome dinner for all our guests in the villa's formal dining room. The table was set with crystal and silver, the flowers were arranged in towering displays of local blooms, and the chef had prepared a 7-course tasting menu that showcased the best of Italian cuisine. Each course was paired with wines from different regions of Italy, and the sommelier explained the history and characteristics of each selection. As we finished the final course, a dessert wine that was older than most of our guests, I stood up to make a toast. I want to thank everyone for traveling so far to celebrate with Marcus and me, I began, raising my glass. When we decided to have our wedding here, people asked us why we'd choose somewhere so far from home. The truth is, we wanted to surround ourselves with people who would go to the ends of the earth for us, people who see our love as something worth celebrating in the most beautiful place we could find. I looked directly at my parents as I continued. We're so grateful to everyone who made this week possible. Our guests who took time off work and spent their own money to be here, our vendors who treated our celebration like it was the most important event they'd ever planned, and especially to Marcus's family who contributed so generously to make sure every detail was perfect. That last part was a lie. Marcus's family hadn't contributed financially, but I wanted to plant a seed. I wanted my parents to start thinking about contributions and what they had or hadn't given to my wedding. The next morning, I put the next phase of my plan into action. I arranged for my parents to have a private tour of the villa with Francesca, during which she would naturally mention some of the costs involved in hosting an event of this scale. I made sure they understood that Marcus and I had paid for everything ourselves, without any family help, despite the enormous expense. The venue alone is €150,000 for the week, Francesca mentioned casually as she showed them the ceremony space. But Serafina and Marcus wanted everything to be perfect. They said cost was no object when it comes to celebrating with the people they love. I watched my mother's face go pale as the numbers started adding up in her head. The accommodations for 35 guests, the catering, the flowers, the entertainment, the wine, every detail represented a level of expense that dwarfed Madison's country club wedding. And the travel coordination, Francesca continued arranging flights and transfers for guests from America, ensuring everyone had the support they needed to make the journey. Serafina was so thoughtful about making sure no one felt excluded because of the distance. But the real masterstroke came the evening before the wedding during the rehearsal dinner. I had arranged for each guest to receive a personalized gift, handcrafted leather journals with their names embossed in gold, filled with photos and memories from our relationships. For most guests, these were simple tokens of appreciation. For my parents, they were psychological warfare. Their journals contained photos spanning my entire life, graduation pictures they'd barely acknowledged, business achievements they'd dismissed, moments of success they'd overlooked in favor of Madison's smaller accomplishments. But more importantly, they contained copies of documents I'd obtained through my investigation bank statements, showing the inheritance funds receipts from Madison's wedding expenses and a letter from my grandmother's lawyer, detailing exactly when I should have been informed about my inheritance. I watched my father open his journal and saw the moment he realized what he was looking at. His face went from confusion to recognition to something approaching panic as he flipped through pages that documented his financial betrayal in black and white. "Serafina," he started, but I cut him off with a smile. "Tomorrow is going to be such a beautiful day," I said cheerfully. "I can't wait for you to see what we have planned." That night, I knew they wouldn't sleep. They'd spend the entire night trying to figure out how much I knew and what I planned to do about it. The beauty of it was that I didn't have to confront them or create a scene. The evidence spoke for itself, and their own guilt would do the rest of the work. My wedding day dawned absolutely perfect. Clear skies, gentle breeze, golden light filtering through the cypress trees. As I got ready in the villa's bridal suite, surrounded by my closest friends and wearing a dress that cost more than most people's cars, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't experienced in months. The ceremony was everything I'd dreamed of and more. Marcus and I exchanged vows in the villa's ancient chapel with 35 people who genuinely loved us, witnessing our promises to each other. The reception was magical dinner on the terraced gardens as the sun set, dancing under string lights that turned the night into something from a fairy tale, and toasts that celebrated not just our marriage but the journey that had brought us to this perfect moment. My parents barely spoke during the entire celebration. They went through the motions, smiled for photos, and played the part of proud parents, but I could see the weight of their guilt crushing them with every perfect detail they witnessed. But the wedding itself was just the setup for the real revenge, which wouldn't come until we returned to the States. The aftermath of our Tuscan wedding was even more satisfying than the event itself, largely because I got to watch my parents' guilt eat them alive while I maintained complete plausible deniability about my intentions. For 2 weeks after we returned home, they said nothing about the documents in the journals, clearly hoping I would just let the whole thing slide like I had so many other slights over the years. They were wrong. The silence from my parents was deafening. No phone calls to thank me for including them in such an incredible experience, no acknowledgement of the obvious expense and effort that had gone into creating the perfect wedding weekend. Just radio silence, which told me everything I needed to know about their state of mind. Meanwhile, the other wedding guests couldn't stop talking about the experience. Social media was flooded with photos from Tuscany. Friends were calling to thank me for the most amazing wedding they'd ever attended, and Marcus's colleagues at the hospital kept asking him about planning their own destination. Celebrations. The contrast was stark. Everyone else treated our wedding like the magical experience it had been, while my parents acted like they'd attended a funeral instead of a celebration. I waited exactly 2 weeks before making my move, timing it perfectly for maximum impact. Madison and Derek had just returned from their honeymoon, and my parents were hosting their usual Sunday family dinner to hear all about the trip. I showed up unannounced with Marcus carrying a bottle of expensive Italian wine and wearing the kind of smile that should have warned them something was coming. Sarah Madison jumped up to hug me. "Oh my God, tell me everything about Italy. The photos you posted looked absolutely incredible. I'm so jealous." "It was perfect," I said, returning her hug with genuine warmth. Because here's the thing I had realized during my investigation, that Madison wasn't the villain in this story. She was just the golden child who had been manipulated as much as I had, in her own way. The real culprits were sitting at the head of the table trying to pretend they weren't dreading this conversation. Madison looked genuinely disappointed that she'd missed the wedding. "I keep thinking about how we could have made it work financially. Derek feels terrible that we couldn't be there for your big day." Don't worry about it, I said, though I filed away her comment for later consideration. I know wedding expenses add up quickly. Over dinner, I regaled everyone with stories from the wedding, showing photos on my phone and describing details that made it clear this hadn't been just any destination wedding. This had been a once-in-a-lifetime experience that cost more than most people's annual salaries. I watched my parents' discomfort grow, with every anecdote about the villa's history, the private chef, the vintage wines, and the personalized service. Derek was particularly interested in the logistics. How did you coordinate everything from so far away? The planning must have been incredible. Francesca, our coordinator, was amazing, I explained. But honestly, when you're willing to invest in quality people, go above and beyond to make your vision happen. It's amazing what doors open when you prioritize something properly. I saw my parents exchange a look at that comment. Finally, when we reached dessert, I decided it was time. You know, I said casually, the whole experience made me think about family and what we do for the people we love. Like how Derek's family contributed to your wedding, Madison. That was so generous of them. Madison beamed. They were amazing. They really wanted everything to be perfect. And Mom and Dad, I know you took out a loan to help pay for Madison's reception. That was such a sacrifice. The silence that followed was deafening. Madison's smile faltered as she looked between our parents and me, clearly sensing that something was wrong but not understanding what. What loan? She asked slowly. I pulled out my phone and opened the photos I'd taken of the documents from my grandmother's estate file. Well, it wasn't exactly a loan in the traditional sense, more like an advance on money that was already in the family. My father's face had gone completely white. Serafina, we can explain. Oh, please do, I said sweetly. Madison, did you know that Grandma left me $1.2 million plus her house when she died? It was supposed to be distributed after both of our weddings, but somehow Mom and Dad have been managing those funds for the past 8 months. Madison's fork clattered onto her plate. What are you talking about? I swiped through the photos on my phone showing bank statements and receipts. Your engagement ring paid for with my inheritance, the down payment on your house, also my money. The country club reception that was so important it couldn't be moved to accommodate my October date, funded entirely by the inheritance I wasn't supposed to know about. The room was so quiet I could hear the clock ticking in the hallway. Madison looked like she was going to be sick. Madison, I continued gently, I want you to know I don't blame you for this. You had no idea where the money was coming from. But Mom and Dad, you spent 8 months telling me my wedding wasn't as important as Madison's, while literally using my own money to prove your point. My mother finally found her voice. We were going to tell you after. After what? After you'd spent all of it, after I'd been pushed into a December wedding that you couldn't be bothered to prioritize, after I'd proven I could be financially successful enough, that you figured I didn't need my inheritance anyway. Derek, who had been silent through this entire exchange, finally spoke up. Wait, are you saying our whole wedding was paid for with stolen money? Not stolen, my father said quickly. It's family money. We were managing it for both girls. By managing, you mean spending it exclusively on one girl while lying to the other about why her needs didn't matter, Marcus interjected. It was the first time he'd spoken since we'd arrived, and his surgeon's precision with words cut through every excuse my parents might have prepared. Madison stood up abruptly, tears streaming down her face. Oh my God, Sarah, I'm so sorry. I had no idea. If I had known, I know you didn't, I said, reaching out to squeeze her hand. That's why I'm not angry with you. But I am curious about something. I turned back to my parents. How exactly were you planning to manage my inheritance once Madison's wedding was paid for? Were you going to tell me there wasn't as much as we thought? Were you going to claim Grandma's estate planning was unclear. The look of guilt that passed between my parents told me everything I needed to know. They had been planning to minimize my inheritance to make it seem like the money had never been there in the first place. You know what the really beautiful part of this whole situation is, I continued, my voice still perfectly calm. I spent $200,000 of my own money on a wedding in Italy to prove a point about being valued by my family. Meanwhile, you spent $200,000 of my inheritance money on a wedding here to prove that I wasn't valued by my family. The math is almost poetic. Madison was crying openly now. Derek looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. My parents sat in silence, finally understanding that their years of manipulation had been exposed, and there was no way to spin this that made them look like anything other than thieves who had stolen from one daughter to benefit the other. But I wasn't done yet. The real revenge was still coming. What happened next was honestly more satisfying than any dramatic confrontation could have been, because sometimes the best revenge is simply letting people face the natural consequences of their own actions while you get to watch from a safe distance. I left that Sunday dinner without another word, taking Marcus with me, and leaving my family to sort through the wreckage of their relationships with each other. What I learned later from my cousin James, who became my primary source of family intelligence, was that the revelation had triggered a complete meltdown that lasted for weeks. Madison, bless her heart, was devastated when she realized the extent to which she'd unknowingly participated in my financial exploitation. She spent hours on the phone with Derek, going through their finances and realizing how much of their new life together had been built on money that wasn't rightfully theirs. The guilt was eating her alive, especially when she started connecting the dots about all the times my achievements had been minimized while hers were celebrated. Derek, meanwhile, was horrified to discover that his new in-laws were the kind of people who would steal from one child to benefit another. He started questioning everything he thought he knew about the family dynamics he'd married into, and according to James, he'd been asking uncomfortable questions about what other manipulative behaviors he might have missed. My parents tried to do damage control, but there's really no way to spin "we spent our daughter's inheritance" without telling her into anything resembling acceptable behavior. My mother called me 17 times in the first week after our confrontation, leaving increasingly desperate voicemails about how they'd always planned to tell me how they were protecting me from the stress of managing an inheritance. During wedding planning, how they never meant for things to get so complicated. My father's approach was different. He tried to frame it as a business decision, claiming that using the inheritance funds for immediate family needs was a sound financial strategy that benefited everyone. The fact that everyone apparently didn't include me seemed to escape his notice. But here's where the story gets really good, and why I'm sharing this with all of you today. 3 weeks after our family dinner confrontation, I received a certified letter from a law firm I'd never heard of. Inside was a formal notice that Madison and Derek were attempting to refinance their house specifically to pay me back the money that had been used for their wedding expenses. Madison had also quietly returned her engagement ring to the jeweler, the 3-carat diamond that Derek couldn't actually afford, and downgraded to something more modest, using the difference to start a fund for paying me back. When I found out about this through James, I realized that my sister, the golden child who had unknowingly benefited from years of preferential treatment, was actually trying to make things right in the only way she could. The gesture was both heartbreaking and touching. Madison was willing to sacrifice her dream ring and take on debt to correct an injustice she hadn't even known she was participating in. It showed a level of integrity and moral courage that I hadn't expected, and it made me realize that maybe my sister wasn't as complicit in our family's dysfunction as I'd assumed. That's when I made a decision that surprised everyone, including myself. I called Madison. "I heard about the refinancing," I said when she answered, her voice tentative and embarrassed. Sarah, I'm so sorry. I know it's not enough, but we're trying to figure out how to pay you back everything that was spent on our wedding. It's going to take time, but Derek and I are committed to making this right. Madison, stop. You're not paying me back. Silence on the other end of the line. I'm not letting you and Derek go into debt to fix our parents' mess, I continued. You didn't know where the money was coming from. This isn't your responsibility. But Sarah, it's your money. You should have had it all along. You're right, I should have. But taking it from you now doesn't actually fix what Mom and Dad did. It just transfers their debt to you, and that's not justice, that's just shifting the problem around. What I did instead was work with my lawyer to have my parents' access to my grandmother's estate formally revoked, and all remaining funds transferred directly to me. The house sale was expedited, and I received the full inheritance that should have been mine months earlier. My parents were also required to provide a full accounting of every penny they'd spent from the estate, which became a legal document that could be used in any future family discussions about trustworthiness. The accounting was illuminating. Beyond Madison's wedding expenses, they'd also used inheritance money for their own home improvements, a new car, and several vacations they'd taken over the past 8 months. The total amount they'd spent was nearly $400,000 money that should have been earning interest for me while I waited for the official distribution. As for Madison and Derek, I told them to keep their house and return the ring to its original size if they wanted. But I also made it clear that going forward our relationship would be based on honesty and mutual respect, not on the favoritism dynamics our parents had created. Madison had to acknowledge the years of preferential treatment she'd received, and we both had to work through the resentment and guilt that had been built into our sibling relationship by our parents' manipulation. Those conversations weren't easy. Madison had to confront the reality that she'd been the golden child at my expense, and I had to work through years of feeling like the forgotten daughter. But having those honest discussions without our parents' interference allowed us to build something genuine for the first time in our lives. The most satisfying part of this whole experience wasn't the money I recovered or even the justice of exposing my parents' behavior. It was watching my family realize that their golden child dynamics had damaged all of us, and that real relationships require honesty and equity, not manipulation and favoritism. My parents and I still don't have much of a relationship. They've never genuinely apologized for what they did, instead, continuing to frame it as a misunderstanding or a financial management issue. My mother occasionally sends texts about how much she misses me, but they're always followed by justifications for their behavior or attempts to make me feel guilty for not getting over it faster. They also seem to expect that eventually I'll come around and forgive them because family is family. But what they don't understand is that their actions revealed something fundamental about how they view me, not as a daughter whose needs and feelings matter, but as a resource to be managed and manipulated for the benefit of their preferred child. Madison and I, on the other hand, have built something completely new. We talk regularly now, and for the first time in our lives, our conversations aren't filtered through the lens of competing for our parents' attention. She's genuinely happy about my success, and I can celebrate her achievements without feeling like they diminish my own. She's also become one of my closest allies in navigating the ongoing family drama. When my parents try to manipulate her into interceding on their behalf, she shuts it down immediately. When they attempt to rewrite history or minimize what they did, she corrects the record. Having her support has been invaluable in maintaining my boundaries with our parents. Derek has become an unexpected ally in all of this. Having married into our family dysfunction, he brings an outsider's perspective that helps both Madison and me see how abnormal our childhood dynamics really were. He's also become one of Marcus's closest friends, which means our family gatherings now include people who actually like and support each other. As for Marcus and me, our marriage has been strengthened by going through this together. He saw me at my most petty and vindictive, and instead of being horrified, he helped me channel those feelings into effective action. He's also been incredibly patient as I've worked through years of family-related baggage that I didn't even realize I was carrying. The villa in Tuscany became more than just a wedding venue, it became a symbol of what happens when you value yourself enough to demand better treatment. Those photos from our wedding aren't just beautiful memories. They're proof that sometimes the best response to being undervalued is to demonstrate your actual worth in a way that can't be ignored or dismissed. We've actually been back to Villa Bellicorte twice since our wedding, once for our first anniversary and once just because we missed the peace and beauty of the place. Francesca has become a friend, and the villa staff treats us like family, the kind of family that actually celebrates your successes and wants the best for you. Looking back, I realized that my parents' betrayal was actually a gift, though I wouldn't have seen it that way at the time. It forced me to stop waiting for their approval and start building the life I actually wanted. It showed me who in my family was worth maintaining relationships with and who was too toxic to keep in my inner circle. Most importantly, it taught me that sometimes the people who claim to love you the most are the ones most willing to sacrifice your happiness for their own convenience. The inheritance money, when I finally received it, allowed Marcus and me to buy our dream house and invest in opportunities we never could have afforded otherwise. But more than the financial security, it gave me the freedom to completely restructure my relationship with my family on my own terms. I've learned that family isn't just about blood relations, it's about the people who consistently show up for you, celebrate your successes, and treat you with the respect you deserve. Sometimes the family you choose is better than the family you were born into, and that's perfectly okay. So here's my question for all of you watching this. Have you ever discovered that your family's version of love came with strings attached? Have you ever realized that the people who were supposed to support you were actually undermining you behind the scenes? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one, and I love hearing your stories about standing up for yourselves and demanding better treatment. Have you found yourself in a situation where you had to choose between family harmony and your own self-respect? What would you have done if you discovered your parents had been stealing from you to benefit your sibling? I'm genuinely curious about your experiences with family karma and whether you think justice was truly served in my situation. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life drama and family justice stories. Share this video with anyone who's ever felt like the forgotten child or the family scapegoat. Sometimes we all need a reminder that we deserve better than conditional love and manipulative family dynamics. Thank you so much for watching and for all the support you've shown for my stories. Remember, you have the right to demand honesty and respect from the people in your life, even when those people are family. Don't let anyone convince you that you should accept less than you deserve just because they share your DNA. Sometimes the best revenge isn't dramatic confrontation, it's simply living your best life and letting the people who undervalued you watch from the sidelines while you thrive. Build your own villa in Tuscany, metaphorically speaking, and surround yourself with people who see your worth. Until next time, keep standing up for yourselves and never let anyone convince you that you should settle for less than your worth. You deserve a love story as beautiful as the Tuscan countryside, and sometimes you have to be willing to travel far from home to find it. Ciao, for now.